Hey guys, welcome back to Magic TV. My name's Craig. It is 9 o'clock on a Thursday and it's time for another video. And today I want you to do a video that I'm very, very passionate about. It's something I've been meaning to speak about for a while. It's something I've touched on this channel in the past. And I think it's probably going to be one of the most important videos I've ever done. And it's a video on how to make the magic your own, or more importantly, how to make the tricks that you buy your own. And this is something that's really important. You know, we always buy new magic, don't we? That's one of the things about being a magician. You're constantly buying new tricks, and there's constantly new tricks to buy. And it's like a kid in a candy store, isn't it? You know, that you see these new magic, and it's like, I need this one, I need this one. We've all been in that situation where we go to a magic convention, we're walking around for a couple of days, we go back with carrier bags full of stuff. We get it home and we look through these carrier bags and we wonder why we ever bought this in the first place. Why did I buy this? I have no idea what this is. What does it do? Why have I bought it? It ends up going into a bottom drawer, or you watch it and you look at it and you go, right, that's not for me. And it goes into a bottom drawer, and then you revisit it 10 years later and you find it and you don't even know what it is, and it ends up going in the bin. Magicians are hoarders. We buy tricks all of the time and we either put it in the bottom drawer because we can't figure out how to make it work for ourselves, or the other thing that we do is we just end up performing it the same way as everybody else. Look at the invisible deck. 99 times out of 100, when you see a magician perform the invisible deck, they're going to do the invisible deck presentation. I mean, hell, that's why it's called the invisible deck, because of that presentation. But it's a million other tricks. When you see anybody do a sponge ball trick, they're probably going to do the classic sort of, well, the first person I saw, it was Pat Page, but they're going to do that classic routine that you see everybody do. Most people don't deviate from that sponge ball trick. You see somebody with a deck of cards, they're probably going to do an ambitious card, right? You see somebody, look, it goes on and on and on. We buy tricks, we do it the way that the instructions tell us to. And I think one thing that's really fun about being a magician is having the ability to be creative and go through a process where you buy something and you go, okay, that's how it's intended to work. Now, how can I do it? Now, what can I do to make it my own? And that's something that I've tried to do through my whole career, both as a performer and as a creator. As a performer, I do stuff in my show that is marketed effect, absolutely. But I try to make them my own. I try to make it unique to me, so it's different to what anybody else is doing, by changing the presentation or by changing the effect or the way that it's done or something like that. I want to try and make it my own. But I do that with my releases as well. You know, one of the things I'm most passionate about is when I release a project, something like the Visible Project, which was all about the invisible deck, and I tried to take it in a different direction. The Cheek to Cheek project, Cheeky, taking a cheek to cheek deck and moving in a different direction. The same with the Beyond Stebbins project. The same with Forecast. I love taking effects and taking tricks and taking marketed tricks and going, okay, this is how it's intended to be done. If we don't do that, what else can we do with it? And I get people asking all the time, how do I buy a trick and make it my own? How do I do that? And I think it's so important. I've talked in the past about one of the reasons I don't do the traditional sponge ball routine is because I did do it, and then I went to a corporate event and I did it, and I was performing it all night, and the booker came up to me at the end and said, oh, you know, you did a great job. I love that sponge ball trick. My kid's got that in his latest magic kit. Or, you know, it kind of like makes me go, oh. And, you know, there's so many, especially corporates and event planners, so many magicians out there. You know, if everyone's doing the same thing, how is anybody going to stand out? And I think if you're going to become known as a performer or as a creator, you've got to stand out. And there's people out there that are doing this automatically every single time. You look at people like Chris James. He's fooled me over and over again with my own trick. And he's not the only one. I was hanging out with Kev G the other day, and he fooled me with my own trick. It happens over and over again. But there's a lot of people that want to go through that process and just don't know how to do it. So on this video, I've made a plan. You can always tell when I take something seriously. I make notes. I've got 12 points here. 12 points. 12 points on how to make magic your own. How to take a trick that you've bought and to make it your own, so you're not doing it the same way as everybody else. So hopefully this will be helpful for a few people that have asked about a video on this subject. We're going to get into it right now. This is how to make magic your own. Okay, point number one is to watch the tutorial. You know what? We do this, don't we? I've done this in the past. You know, we buy a trick and we skim through the tutorial. Oh, he's talking about the history. We don't need to know about that. He's talked about the crediting. We don't need to know about that. Oh my God! Right, we're on variation number 17 of this particular trick. Skip. Done, halfway through. Ryland does that. It frustrates the hell out of me. He'll watch a trick and I have to force him to watch the whole thing, because when he's got the gist, he's too excited to go out and do it, and he doesn't want to watch all the alternative handlings. I think it's really important to watch the whole tutorial, because especially if it's a meaty tutorial, if it's a really long tutorial, I think that's very important, because you're going to get the artists and the creators thought process as to why they did what they did, why they went down that particular route. And I think if you watch the whole tutorial and you watch the performances, you'll get a better idea of where that creator was coming from when he came up or she came up with that trick. So it's really important to watch the tutorial. I have in the past bought a trick, looked at it, went away, tried to make it my own, and then went back to the tutorial and found that I just reinvented something that they already went through in the bonus material, and I just completely missed it. So watch the tutorial, because it'll expand your knowledge base on that particular trick. You know, if you buy a trick and it's like you just watch how to do the main routine, that's great. But if you're wanting to make this your own, you want to know every little thing about that particular trick, and the one way to do that is by watching the tutorial. So make sure that you watch the tutorial and take notes. You know, have a notes page and take notes about the tutorial and what they say and what they don't say. That sort of thing is always really helpful. So point number two, when you've watched the tutorial, the next thing to do is to put a pin in it. Once you've learnt the trick and you've learnt it the way that they suggest that you do it, and maybe you've learnt the different handlings and the different alternate handlings and the different alternate ways of doing it, put a pin in that trick, put it to one side, and let it go. Because the only way that you're actually going to be able to come up with new handlings and new ideas is by putting a pin in the traditional way of doing this trick. So case in point, when I put together the Visible project, which took years to put together, the first thing I had to do is say, okay, so what's the effect? The effect, as per the instructions for this thing, is that somebody names a card and it's the only card turned over in that deck. Well, that's a really great trick. But if I don't do that, and I don't have a card turnover, and it's nothing to do with a card turning over in a deck, and instead I go for a different approach, well, what can I do with it then? So, and it's only by removing the thing that it's meant to do that you can free your mind to start thinking in other directions. If you kind of keep the main effect on the table. So if I said, right, let's think about all the different ways I can have a card turn over in a deck in a different way, then that's going to limit my thinking. So put a pin in whatever the main routine is and put it to one side. You can revisit it again later, but if you really want to go through the process of making the magic your own, then put a pin in it for time being. Okay, so point number three, change the presentation. Think about a way of doing this trick in a different way to what they suggest doing with it. So I'll give you a perfect example. Again, using the invisible deck, I have a routine called Future Craig. And if you haven't seen my Visible project, the idea of Future Craig is that I have a deck of cards on the table and I talk about how I can communicate with myself in the future, and that how I can work out what someone's card is I'll just speak to myself in the future after they've named a card. And then I offer proof. I say to somebody, I'm going to turn a card over in this deck in a second, and it's going to be the card that you name, and I'll know this because I'll be speaking to myself in the future. And as I'm saying all of this, my phone rings and it comes up with Future Craig. And so I answer the phone to Future Craig and I have a conversation with Future Craig, and Future Craig tells me what the card is. So then I take the deck and I turn around or put it under the table and I turn one card over. I put it back down on the table and I'm right. Okay, I've got it. It doesn't matter. And I'm done. I know that this is going to be your card because it's predetermined. I've spoken to myself in the future. So they name a card and sure enough, the card that's turned over in the deck is their card. And then I ring myself in the past. Now I'm the future version of myself. I ring myself in the past and I have the other half of the conversation that they just heard a couple of minutes before. Great presentation. I love performing that trick. I really do. But in essence, when you actually think about what the trick is, it's the invisible deck. One card turns over in the deck, right? A card turns over in the deck. Now, I know I said earlier on, put a pin in it, and it's fine to put a pin in it, but when you're thinking about changing the presentation, you're changing the presentation to the trick that's already there, right? I should have maybe said put a pin in it after you'd thought through presentational ideas. So that's my bad. But changing the presentation can radically alter the trick. You could watch somebody do an invisible deck routine, and then you could watch me do my future Craig routine, and it would look completely different. The audience wouldn't perceive that the tricks are similar, whilst in actual fact, from a methodology point of view, they're identical, but they're not. The audience doesn't perceive them as being identical. So now that trick becomes unique to me. Whilst everybody else is telling people to shuffle invisible decks and turn them over and put them back in the pack, I'm communicating with myself in the future. It's a very interesting approach, but you can do that with absolutely everything. There's a million different ways to present something. Think about who you are, think about your personality, think about your character, and think about how you can make the magic your own. That's really important. So how can you change the presentation to make the trick your own? You know, think about all of the different props that you've got and the ways that you perform it, and then think about how you can actually perform them in a completely different way. Future Craig is a great example, but there's a million other examples that are just as good. Okay, so the next thing is to change the actual effect. And as we're talking about the invisible deck, let's talk about the invisible deck some more, and let's talk about Steve Bedwell. So Steve Bedwell is an incredible magician, and he released a trick many, many years ago, and I've got a version of it on Visible, but with his permission, by the way. But he released an incredible trick from many, many years ago called Shake and Bake. And Shake and Bake uses an invisible deck. And the idea with Shake and Bake is you use the invisible deck to do a triumph routine. So you have somebody name a card, you shuffle the cards, you take a deck of cards and you shuffle them face up into face down, mixing the face up cards into the face down cards, and you give them a really good mix up, and then you put them in a pot noodle pot and you start shaking up this pot noodle pot so the cards are getting mixed up face up into face down, all over the place. You then take them out the pot noodle pot and you show they're all mixed up, face up into face down. And then quick as a snap, you snap your fingers and they've all sorted themselves out except for one card, which is the card that they've named, which is just a brilliant trick. It's one of the best versions of triumph you will ever see. Now, here's the thing. The effect has been changed. You're using the exact same prop, and you're using it in many ways in a very similar way, but the effect, and really the effect has been changed. So it's no longer a card turning over in the deck, it's a triumph. You're mixing all the cards face up into face down, and then all of the cards end up facing the right way, except for the one card that they've named. It's an ultra clean triumph because of how the invisible deck works. Now contrast that to the previous routine where I talked about changing the presentation. With Future Craig, it's the exact same trick. A card turns over in the deck. There's no difference. The difference here is that the effect has changed. But both routines, both the original invisible deck routine, both the Future Craig and Shake and Bake, use the same prop. It's how the prop is being used that differs. So a lot of the time when you're making magic your own, you can change the effect. Sometimes you can change the presentation. Sometimes you can do both. Sometimes by changing the effect, the presentation will automatically change. So case in point here, by changing it to a triumph, the presentation is changing because now, rather than talking about an invisible deck, we're talking about shuffling the cards face up into face down. So yeah, think about how you can take the exact same prop and change the effect, but without adding or taking anything away. So that exact same prop, what can you do with it to change it? And as I say, shake and bake is a perfect, an absolute perfect example, because it is the same prop. It's an invisible deck, right? But you're using it in a completely different way. My cheeky bet routine, which Harrison has actually got, an incredible version of as well from his book. The cheeky bet is a perfect example because you've got a cheek-to-cheek deck, which everybody has used for a triumph routine, a self-working triumph routine. But here you have the whole thing turned on its head, and it becomes a bar betcher. Hey, I'm going to bet that I can sort out my cards before you sort out your cards, and I'm going to give you a 10-second head start, and then you've got a magical payoff at the end. But ultimately, at the end of the day, it's exactly the same prop, which is a cheek-to-cheek deck, but the effect on the audience is completely changed and turned on its head. So when you're thinking about making the magic your own, think about both changing the presentation and changing the effect. Point number 5 is think about how you can include other props in this. So think about when you're working with a particular trick, think about how you can incorporate other props which make the effect different. So again, I'll go back to the invisible deck. When Steve Bedwell released his shake and bake routine, he used a pot noodle container. Now I've got a version of it, again with his permission, on my visible project, and I use a brown paper bag. Basically the same thing, right? By introducing that prop, everything changes. Now we'll use another example, sponge balls. Anybody who's seen my Penguin Live or is a subscriber to Netrix, then you've probably seen my routine sponge. I do it a lot in lectures where a coin and a sponge ball change places. That came about as a result of not wanting to do a traditional sponge ball trick, but wanting to incorporate a sponge ball in some way into my act. And I thought, well, hang on a minute, I've got a coin. If I have a coin and a sponge ball and they change places, that'd be really cool. And then after that, bringing in a metal ball and having them fuse together into a metal ball was then taking that to a next level. Now I'm incorporating a metal ball as like a final load. I'm incorporating a coin, and I'm incorporating a sponge ball. Now, by adding those extra props, I'm completely changing the use of the sponge ball, which, let's be honest, everybody pretty much uses for the exact same thing. Now, by incorporating those props, I'm actually changing the effect as well. The effect becomes a transposition between two objects. And that's the point. Sometimes you need to actually, sometimes you'll struggle with this. So once you've watched the tutorial and you've put a pin in it, right, and you've put that to one side, you'll think, how can I change the presentation? Oh, I can't think of anything. Right, okay, right, how can I change the effect? I can't think of anything. Right, okay, so can I incorporate other props? Yes, I can incorporate this. Oh, brilliant. Well, if I incorporate that, that's good, because if I incorporate that, that allows me to change the effect. Oh, right, now I can change the effect, but only when, and you want to go through this step by step. And I'm going to talk about this later on, but take notes all the way through this. You want to make as many notes as you possibly can and keep on top of what it is that you're doing and what it is that you're, the process that you're going through, else you'll end up getting lost. So through the whole process, make notes. But yeah, think about how you can incorporate other props into the trick that you've bought that will allow you to change things around and change the effect around, or the methodology around, which is the other thing as well, obviously. Okay, so point number 6, we've got incorporating the trick that you've bought into a longer routine. Okay, so incorporating the trick that you've bought into a longer routine. Is there some way of taking it and incorporating it into a longer routine? So I'll give you an example here, again using the invisible deck. We seem to keep coming back to the invisible deck idea, so I'm going to give you an example. With the invisible deck, I've got a routine on my visible project where I actually do a confabulation. So I'm doing a confabulation where there's a story of going and playing poker, and I go out and I play poker, and the audience helps me construct what this story is. And it's like, okay, so what time am I going to this poker game, and how much money am I betting on this poker game, and am I winning? If I am, do I win? And if I do win, what card do I win with when I'm playing poker? You know, all of these questions get asked, and then I'm able to reveal that I turned one card over in the middle of the deck from the very beginning, and the one card that I turned over has written on the back the amount of money, the time, it has all of that information, and then when you turn the card round, the card is actually the card that they named. So the confabulation is a routine, and the invisible deck is just one part of it. I've got other techniques going on as well, like equivoke and a bunch of other stuff going on, and I've got another deck involved and force cards and so on and so forth. But the invisible deck is one part of that. The point I've got here is, can you incorporate the prop that you're working with, or the trick that you're working with, into a longer routine? So rather than using it as a standalone piece, is there a way of actually incorporating it and making it a lot longer? So for example, currently at the moment, Ryland is working on a new trick in his show, and he's working on the Smoky Mountain mirror penetration, which, if you don't know what it is, it's a stage item, and the idea is that you have a mirror on stage and you stand behind it and you put your hand through the mirror. And that's a great trick, but he wants to make it his own, because obviously that would just be a minute routine. Hey, boom. So he's changed it in a couple of different ways. So the first thing that he's done is he's added another phase. So rather than just bringing out a mirror, showing the mirror and doing the allusion to music, he starts off with a sponge ball type sequence, where he starts off by reaching into the mirror and producing a sponge ball from the mirror, and then pushing the mirror, using some basic sleight of hand, pushing the sponge ball from the back of the mirror to the front, and pushing the sponge ball from the back of the mirror to the front. And he does that a couple of times. And then he says, hey, so he's incorporating another prop into this. He's incorporating sponge balls, and they think the trick is a sponge ball penetration, and the mirror's just there to allow for the penetration. And then he goes into a totally different presentation. And the presentation he's got is, he talks about, hey, I'm going to teach you how that trick works. So when I'm putting a ball through a mirror, I'm going to teach you how it works. It's actually really simple. All I do is I just vibrate my molecules really fast so that I can penetrate the ball through the mirror. Have you ever seen The Flash? Well, if you've seen The Flash, you'll know that not only is he really fast, he can penetrate through objects by vibrating his molecules. I'm doing the same thing. You probably don't believe me, so I'll prove it to you. Watch this. And then he has the music from The Flash come on, and then he does the penetration of the arm, right? Now, I'm going to talk later on about inspiration and looking for inspiration. The inspiration that Ryland had for that was watching David Regal do a coins through the table routine, where he talks about the Flash, and he talks about vibrating his molecules. By incorporating a sponge ball into the routine, and by incorporating a presentation from somebody by David Regal, which Ryland kind of really related to, because superheroes, right? And then taking the prop as a whole, what you then have is you have what appears to be a completely different routine from where it was originally, right? So the point I'm trying to make is, can you incorporate the prop that you're using into a longer routine so it becomes more than just the sum of its parts? Okay, so point number 7, and I talked about this a little bit earlier on, but search for inspiration, right? Very, very important. You search for inspiration. Now, this can take a few different ways. Now, I used the example earlier on with Ryland. He was looking for a presentation to do with penetrations, and you know, he was looking at the various different coins through tables, and he was going through my L&L DVDs. And that's when he found the David Regal thing. But, you know, that's an example of doing research. Search for inspiration. It can be using Google, or going on Facebook or the Magic Cafe and Googling the trick. So, for example, you're working with an invisible deck. You're trying to figure out different ways of doing an invisible deck. Google invisible deck tricks or presentations for invisible deck. Go on the Magic Cafe, search for presentations for invisible decks, see if anybody's talking about something that's been done before. And I'm not suggesting that you emulate that, not by any stretch of the imagination, but that might fire up some synapses and go, well, okay, this person's doing this with it. That's an interesting way. Can I do something like that? Or as Ryland did, okay, this is a really cool presentation for a coin through table. Can I apply that to a small stage illusion? And if I can, how would that look? Right? So go and watch some YouTube videos of people performing the trick and see if that, look at Instagram, look at people like Chris James, who regularly posts Instagram videos of him doing tricks that are commercially available that are a little bit different, and he's presented them in a different way, or he's changed around the actual effect. All of this stuff is really useful. Search for inspiration. Don't try and do everything yourself. Look for inspiration, not just with that particular trick, but look for inspiration elsewhere. Look for inspiration all over the place. When I again, going back to the invisible deck, one of my favorite tricks is a routine called celebrity prediction, which is a prediction of a celebrity using an invisible deck. And I use a book called Celebrity Prestige, which is a great book, by the way. That came about as I was working with the invisible deck, and I knew I wanted a prediction on the back of the card, and I was trying to think of the cleanest way to do that, and I was looking for prediction effects, and that's when Celebrity Prestige popped into my head. So just think about looking for inspiration, because that will really help as well. Okay, so the next thing is to think of an overarching narrative. So what I mean by that is if you've got a show and you've got a particular narrative that runs all the way through that show, think about how you can apply that to the trick that you're doing to make it your own. So, for example, I'll use Tom Crosby here as an example. The narrative that runs through the whole of his show is that he's a performing nerd. So everything that he does has to be from a nerd's point of view. So I've seen Tom do book tests in the past. And when he does a book test, it's not like he has somebody think of a word and he reads their mind. He instead is making it look like he's got this incredible memory, and he's getting a little bit of information from the spectator, and then he's using his nerd-like abilities to use this big brain and this amazing memory to come up with the word that they're thinking of, right? Another example is with the Rubik's Cube. Now, a lot of people will shake this Rubik's Cube and say that they've solved it by magic. I do that. Tom doesn't, even though he's more than capable of doing that sort of thing. He talks about how, hey, I'm going to solve Rubik's Cube. Now, it looks like magic, but it's not. I'm keeping track of the amount of moves. I know I'm about 8 moves away from being solved. I'm going to throw the cube up in the air, catch it, and take those 8 moves out. And if I do it fast enough, it looks like real magic. He's changing the presentation and the effect of the trick based on the narrative that runs throughout his show and his performing character. So when you're trying to make a trick your own, think about your performing character, think about your overarching narrative, and see if you can have it fit within that. Point number 9 is when you've been thinking through all of this stuff, you might want to jam with your magic buddies, both online and offline, because, there's no such, what am I trying to say here? Well, there's, you speak to other people, they're going to come up with some amazing ideas. So I've got a trick that I do, and I've sat down recently with Kev G and Colin Klaus, and the trick that I do is with the Rubik's Cube, and it's a great trick. And anyone who knows Kevin Cole will tell you that they're 2 of the best Rubik's Cube magicians in the world. And I showed them this trick, and they were like, oh my God, that's really great. But then fooled me with my own trick. I gave them one to have a look at and play with, and they fooled me with my own trick. And they pointed something out to me that I never would have thought of in a million years. My brain just isn't wired to think that way. And I am aware of my limitations. I'm aware of what I'm good at and what I'm not very good at. And there's certain things that I'm not great at. And Kev and Colin looked at this particular thing and they were like, hey, have you thought about doing this? And I was like, no, I haven't. That's genius. And I never would have thought about doing this. So yeah, I suppose the important thing here is don't be afraid to jam with your magic buddies and say to them, hey, I've been working with this prop and I've been trying to think of a different way of doing it to make it my own. And this is where I've got so far. This is the process I've gone through. Can anybody suggest anything to help me move it in a different direction? So yeah, don't be afraid to jam with magic buddies, both online and offline. Okay, so point number 10, and this is a really important one, take notes. Make regular notes throughout all of this process. This process could take place, and don't limit yourself on time. It could take place over a month, 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, 6 months, a year. Before Visible came out, I was working with the Invisible deck for probably a decade, trying to come up with different ways of doing things. So make sure you're taking notes, because you will forget stuff. You'll have an amazing idea and you'll forget it. I am in the habit now, whenever anything pops up into my head, however stupid, I write it down on the notes page on my phone, because I don't want to forget it, and I know that I will. I'm 47 now. I'm not able to remember stuff as well as I used to. So take notes and remember that nothing is off the table. You know, just take notes on absolutely anything. There's no such thing as stupid ideas. If you've got an idea that might work, write it down. It might not work, but if you don't write it down, you'll never know. Okay, so the next point, I've got kind of 2 points in one here, which is don't be frustrated and revisit in the future. Don't be frustrated and revisit in the future. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, first of all, don't be frustrated with this process. There are going to be times where you feel that you're hitting your head against a brick wall. And no matter how hard you try to approach the situation and see if you can take things in a different direction, you can't make it happen. Don't be frustrated. There's no limit on this. It can take a year, it can take a day, it can take a month, it can take 6 months. Don't try and put yourself under pressure when it comes to trying to make a trick your own. And also revisit it in the future. If there's nothing you can do, you bought a trick, you can't figure out a way of changing the effect, the presentation, you can't think of a way to fit it into a longer routine, you can't find anything to inspire you, there's no way that it fits into your overarching narrative, that's fine. Revisit it in 6 months' time, because every day we improve, every day we get better, every day we expand our knowledge base, and every single day we're learning something new that we didn't learn before. And you can take that information and you can apply it to anything that you're working on. You will be a better magician, you will be a better performer, you will be a better creator in 6 months, in a year, in 2 years, in 5 years, in 10 years. So don't be afraid to revisit this prop. If it's a prop that you enjoy working with and it's a prop that you really want to make your own, revisit it in the future. And one final point, point number 12, and I've got here, have fun with the process. The process of making magic your own, the process of making a trick your own, the process of taking that marketed product and making it your own is not something that's going to happen overnight. It's not going to happen in a week. It's not going to happen in a month. It could do, but it's unlikely. But it should be something that's fun. One of the best things for me about magic is the fact that I get to be creative. I love creating stuff. I'm not just talking about tricks that I might market at some point down the line or might not market. I'm just talking about for my own personal enjoyment, making a trick. I'm buying that trick and saying, great, I love that, but I'm going to do it this way because this way suits me better and I have more fun when I perform it that way as opposed to this way. Enjoy the process. Don't be frustrated with it, but have fun. Enjoy the process of creation and innovation and change and just that's a big part of magic. If you're just in it to buy a trick and perform it and be a performing monkey, you're never going to have as much fun as going through this whole creative process of trying to make a trick your own. You don't have to do this. You can be a magic and have a successful career, or you can be a magic and be an incredible performer and never make a trick your own and never create anything at all. But I'll tell you right now, if you make the effort to make a trick your own, if you make the effort to make the magic your own, it will help lead to you being a better creator. So start now. Start taking those tricks that are in your bottom drawer that you've never done anything with. Start taking those tricks that you've bought and you've done it the same way as everyone else and start turning them on their head and seeing how you can do it differently, because that will make I guarantee that'll make you more creative and ultimately you'll enjoy the process. I promise you, if you just give it a go. So there you go, guys. Bit of a different video today, but it's one I've been wanting to do for a while. I hope you enjoyed it, but please give me some feedback and let me know in the comments down below. Do you want to see more videos like this? Again, let me know in the comments down below. If you want to see more videos like this, like the video, subscribe to the channel. I'm going to be back again tomorrow with another video, but don't forget you can join the Netrix. If you want to support me, you can do so. Just go to www.thenetrix.com. That's www.thenetrix.com. See what all the fuss is about. See why so many people love the Netrix. I will see you again soon. Thank you so much for watching. My name's Craig from Magic TV.